Good evening. Please be seated. Family and friends of our graduates, honored guests, faculty, staff, commencement speakers, and graduating seniors, welcome to the 2024 commencement for the interdisciplinary majors of the College of Letters and Science at the University of California, Berkeley. Today, we celebrate you, our graduates in American Studies, in the Interdisciplinary Studies field major, and in Media Studies. My name is Jennifer Johnson Hanks. I'm the Executive Dean of the College of Letters and Science, and it is my great privilege to welcome all of you here on behalf of the university. Our ceremony today is being live streamed. There is a link available on the UGIS commencement website, and a recording will be available at the same link in about 2 days. Please silence your cell phones and keep the aisles clear for safety. This is a time and a place for celebrating our graduates and their families, and I ask you to be in this space with that spirit. Berkeley is a community of inquiry committed to academic freedom and expanding opportunity for all. Our students come to us from all corners of the state and all corners of the world. Some of you who are graduating today are fourth-generation Golden Bears. Others are the first in their family to attend college. Our students include people who are parents, who are different, people who are differently abled, who lack certain documents, and who have decided to return to school later in life. Our students have a range of political views and different life experiences. The diversity of our students at Berkeley is one of our greatest riches, and we are very lucky to have you. It is my sincere hope that we can maintain accessible and excellent public higher education in California for the generations who will follow. The students who are graduating today have experienced college in a remarkable era, marked by pandemic and its aftermath, by financial challenges, political turmoil, and even war. Those of you who came to Berkeley as first years began your college years with remote instruction. Remember that? You experienced the most extensive strike in higher education history, and you are graduating in a time of war and protest. Perhaps more than any since the Second World War, your generation has experienced hardship and uncertainty, and you have endured. You are a brave and resilient cohort. You have been at the forefront of confronting racism, inequality, climate change, and injustice. Life may bring you more hardship. Life will bring you more hardship. But when it does, I ask that you remember all that you have already overcome. I think you can handle about anything. Our graduates have overcome substantial challenges to be here today, and the achievement is, of course, theirs. But it is also all of yours. You, the parents, the spouses, the friends, the roommates, the aunts and siblings and uncles and children of our graduates. You have lifted them up. You have supported them. And we are celebrating you today as well. The degree we will be bestowing today is the Bachelor of Arts, also known as the BA. The term arts here does not refer to the creative or performing arts specifically, as we commonly use the word, but comes from the Latin artes, meaning the practices of knowledge. A degree from the Berkeley College of Letters and Science is focused on educating students in those practices of knowledge that will enable them to lead lives of consequence and contribution beyond themselves, lives of civic engagement, of service, creativity, and innovation. Our students go on to become judges and entrepreneurs and activists and doctors and artists and more. Some become professors or deans. I am Berkeley class of 1994, and I am and I'm absolutely thrilled to have you join me today in the long line of Letters and Science alums. I will now have the privilege of introducing another Berkeley alum, our keynote speaker, Nadine Tang. Ms. Tang exemplifies the values of a Berkeley education. She has courageously and creatively contributed to human well-being her whole life. Ms. Tang is a social worker in private practice and an associate professor of clinical psychology at Berkeley. She is a former instructor at the Ann Martin Center, which provides educational and counseling services to at-risk youth in Alameda County. And she also taught psychology at Tsinghua University in Beijing. From 1976 to 1986, Ms. Tang served as a staff social worker at University Health Services on the Berkeley campus. There, she founded and directed the Immigrant and Refugee Student Program, an initiative designed to ease the transition to Berkeley for our students from overseas, and she developed targeted services for this population. Ms. Tang is also a generous donor to the campus, most recently with a gift to the library that enables the new student-facing Center for Connected Learning to be named after our Chancellor Carol Christ. She is a trustee emeritus of the UC Berkeley Foundation, an emeritus member of the LNS Advisory Board, and co-chair of the Board of Visitors. Ms. Tang has been honored as a member of the Order of the Golden Bear and the Berkeley Fellows, and she is a builder of Berkeley. Please join me in welcoming to the podium our esteemed colleague, Nadine Tang.
Wow, you're quite a crowd. You're awesome. So greetings to all of the graduates of the class of 2024, to all the proud parents, friends, and families, to the wonderful faculty and staff who helped make this day possible. I cannot express adequately what an amazing class you are. You are the COVID class. Most of you completed high school remotely, missing out on the important milestones of your senior years. There was no senior prom, nor an in-person graduation. You were deprived of the opportunity to say goodbye to the friends you had studied with for almost 4 years. You were unable to take leave of your teachers and counselors, some of whom were important in helping you on your journey to Berkeley. Making the transition to university is never an easy one and is filled with anxiety. It is, in my opinion, the most difficult transition you have ever made or may ever make. But it was made even harder by the chaotic end to high school and the unknown and new environment of the university. You came at a time when you could not experience the hustle and bustle of thousands of your college mates. Contact with others was from behind masks. The normal ways of getting to know your fellow students was severely limited by the restrictions on who you could mingle with. The chance to become part of a community around meals and in walking to and from classes was almost non-existent. In addition, you are all pioneers by virtue of your choice to create your own majors. This involves having a vision for what you are interested in and how you want to answer questions about these issues. It takes courage to do so. My own experience as a college freshman was challenging, but in a different way. I arrived in Boston from Hong Kong at the age of 16, knowing no one and being inexperienced in the culture of the US and of the American education system. I was totally lost and had a hard time connecting to others who saw me as a foreign being. I would be asked questions such as, does your father work in a laundry or in a restaurant? or say something in Chinese for me. It made me feel unbearably lonely, and I was desperate to find a community. One day, while walking on campus, I saw another Chinese woman, a pretty rare occurrence in those days. Uncharacteristically, I went up to her to compliment her on her dress, trying to make a connection with someone who looked like me. Fortunately, she did not treat me like some pathetic creature, even though I felt like one. It helped. In a way, I was rather pathetic. I was sorely tempted to give up, but was inspired by my paternal grandmother, who was sent to study in England when she was 15 years old from Shanghai. If she could survive and thrive, then the least I could do was finish one semester. I did manage to survive and to graduate, but I never thrived. I just remember feeling that I never belonged and that I was homesick and at times unbearably lonely. If I had known about psychotherapy, I might have sought help. But mental health was not something one dealt with openly, and it is certainly more available today. My younger sister began studying here at Berkeley as an undergrad, and I came out for a visit. This place felt so much more welcoming, and I was never asked bizarre questions about Asian food and culture. Maybe I couldn't have articulated it at the time, but I felt like Berkeley could provide me with community I was craving. I applied to and got accepted to the School of Social Work at Berkeley, and I have been in this inspiring place ever since. The 2-year program was the beginning of my education in learning to be a psychotherapist, to understand how the past can impact how people turn out. I wanted to gain an appreciation of different people from different backgrounds. Given my own experience as an undergrad, it was probably no accident that I spent 22 years of my career working in college mental health. In my career, I worked here at Berkeley in the counseling and psychological services for 10 years, working with students in distress. Subsequently, I worked for another 12 years at Mills College in the same capacity. It was incredibly rewarding work to see students who were struggling come into their own and to develop more coping skills. I want to circle back to where I began to talk a bit about what we have learned from the COVID years, and particularly from your experience coming into a stressful and unknown university world. By definition, you are a resilient group to have made it here today. Your families were also brave in their willingness to let you come. Before COVID, I would not have been as comfortable addressing some of the mental health issues that have now emerged. More than any particular illness, we as a society are not open to talking about the feeling of loneliness. Previously, this was not a topic that many people in the world, and especially Americans, cared to address. One of my observations about American culture is the value placed on independence, on being able to go it alone and not need anyone. I think this is epitomized in heroes who are often portrayed as loners. Yet as I tried to think of examples, I realized that every one that came to mind relied on at least one companion. Batman had Robin. Robinson Crusoe relied on Friday. I think lone heroes are in fact a myth. We all need relationships and help throughout our lives. What the isolation enforced by the pandemic on many of us made us realize is the importance of having others in our lives, in having a community. The spell of the importance of independence in American culture was broken. And in referring to community, I don't just mean intimate or close relationships. I'm struck by how enriching it is to have brief exchanges with a lifeguard, a mailman, a colleague in the hallway, or someone in the locker room. The moments of connection, both big and small, truly add up. Most importantly, this recognition of the need for others allowed us to reach out, to seek relationships, and to realize that this did not mean that one was weak or dependent, but merely human. There are times when each of us will feel lonely, and that is when we should seek out others. They may be lonely too. Now that it is more acceptable to talk about emotional issues, I wanted to address a couple of others that we all experience. These are anxiety and depression. Both are for the most part normal, though unpleasant. It was with a great deal of anxiety that I accepted this invitation to address you. And if you don't believe I'm not anxious now, okay. It kept me up one whole night worrying about what I might say that might be useful. It is also what made me think about what I could say and write it down so I could ease my anxiety. I think it would have been strange not to be anxious. Anxiety can be helpful in motivating us to action. But when does anxiety become a problem? Another end of the spectrum is when a person's anxiety becomes so powerful that they are unable to function, when it gets in the way of daily life and makes it hard for them to leave their homes. What we know is that these states can occur, but sometimes be short-term. And we also know that it is a good idea to reach out for help when the anxiety feels overwhelming and lasts more than a few days. It can create tunnel vision that others can help us see out of. The same can be said of depression. We will all feel depressed over certain occurrences in our lives. Usually it is related to loss or disappointment, the death of someone or something important, the ending of a relationship, a bad grade when one has worked hard, things not turning out as one had hoped. This is a natural response to difficulties that life dishes out. Some losses can feel overwhelming, but will eventually be processed. The depression becomes a problem when it affects appetite, sleep, concentration, and introduces thoughts and plans of suicide. Needless to say, under these circumstances, one needs to seek help. I'm confident that the stigma that has been attached to emotional problems has lessened as a result of our experiences with the pandemic. I would like to close by saying that one of the things that you and we have learned during the pandemic is the importance of community. I wish I had spent more time with my parents and others who were important to me. I spent too much time trying to prove that I was independent and not in need of others. What I have learned is how crucial to the quality of one's life is the relationship to others. In addition, pay attention to the strengths that you have developed and the resiliency you have demonstrated in coping with COVID. It has been an uncomfortable experience, but reflect back on how you overcame the difficulties and increased your abilities to deal with adversity. Having uncomfortable experiences is what makes us grow. My experiences in Boston propelled me into a rewarding career and made me understand the importance of community. As a graduate of the University of California, Berkeley, you will never lack for community. On a recent trip to a remote island, I met 3 proud Berkeley grads. You are now a part of a group of almost 500,000 proud alum. As someone who has been an active alumni for the past 20 years, I do not feel alone. Without a doubt, there are many big challenges facing us all. None of us can solve them on our own. But you have developed the skills needed to work on them in your years at Berkeley. You can change the world. You can and will make this world a better place in your own ways, both big and small. I'm counting on you. Congratulations. Go Bears.
Thank you so much. I now have the privilege to call to the podium Dr. Feng Shu of the who will introduce our student speaker.
Thank you. So I first came to know Ms. Alina Zarate when she applied to our interdisciplinary studies field major in fall 2019. At that early stage, Alina already demonstrated strong research interest in studying the vulnerability of undocumented farm workers in California. Since her 8-month internship with the United Farm Workers Union, UFW, in 2018, she has devoted her college education to that goal. After collecting oral histories from UFW executive board members and conducting extensive archival research of UFW political campaigns involving more than 500 documents concerning federal and state policies in the areas of immigration, labor, and environmental protection, she has written an excellent senior thesis. In her thesis, she successfully challenging the dominant criticism of the UFW by demonstrating their decades of political advocacy to promote justice for farm workers after the passing of Cesar Chavez. Alina's senior thesis is granted the highest honors. It's a very rare recognition. Goal-oriented, hardworking under unexpected and high-stress circumstances, equipped with strong analytical mind and devotion to social justice, Alina represents the top qualities I believe Berkeley undergrad students should all strive for. For her thesis research, she won undergrad research grants and fellowship from Institutes of Governmental Studies and from Latinx Research Center, among others. For her honors thesis, she won the UC Berkeley Library Prize of 2024. She's also the winner of Judith Lee Stronach Baccalaureate Prize 2024, which provides $25,000 to fund her future community-based research. There's better. I'm also happy to share that after graduating from ISF, as the awardee of the National Science Foundation Graduate Research Fellowship Grant in the amount of $160,000. Alina will continue her journey at Berkeley in the Energy and Research Group PhD program this fall. Congratulations, Alina. Now you have the stage.
Before I get started, there are a lot of students in here that did not get a high school graduation. So if you are part of the high school class of 2020, can you please raise your hand? Can we give these students a round of applause, please? Good evening, distinguished faculty, esteemed guests, and fellow graduates. It is an honor to have the privilege of addressing you all on this momentous occasion. I must begin by thanking the Interdisciplinary Studies Department, Dr. Bandari, Dr. Kwamusaman, Dr. Kelkar, and my mentor, Dr. Shu, for honoring me and entrusting me with this responsibility. In doing so, they have chosen not just to value my work here at UC Berkeley, but to uplift a Pasadena City College student, a proud Chicana Latina, the San Gabriel Valley, my family, and the communities that have helped me get here, and for that, I am eternally grateful. UC Berkeley is one of the greatest institutions of higher learning on the planet. Second to none, it touts a rigorous, competitive culture bursting with innovation and opportunity. Here, we are made to believe that anything is possible. But what does it actually mean to forge your own path at this university? The graduates in this room, among the most brilliant and self-motivated undergraduates on this campus, are uniquely attuned to the difficulty of this task. As students of interdisciplinary studies, we are united only by a dissatisfaction with convention, a desire for freedom of exploration, and the struggle of giving our own distinct shape to the abstract promise of possibility. For me, my journey began before I even set foot on this campus. In 2018, at the height of the college admissions scandal, I chose to take a gap year and intern with the United Farm Workers of America. Over several months, I worked in rat-infested buildings trying to save forgotten historical documents. I traveled the California Central Valley, supporting union efforts to enforce basic labor protections for workers while also being exposed to the over 100-degree temperatures, lack of potable water, and the consequences of environmental degradation. And I visited farm workers in their homes, recruiting them for class action lawsuits against employers who had stolen hundreds of millions of dollars in wages, and learning from the stories they chose to share with me. From them, I learned of the poor working conditions, the threat of deportation, and the broader manifestations of injustice that farm workers are expected to work and live with so that we can all have food on our tables. And so I arrived at UC Berkeley, ablaze with the knowledge of what my education was for and confident in this university's promise. But I very quickly realized that while I could not ignore the injustice I had encountered in the fields, no one at this university really cared about what I had experienced or what I wanted to do with my undergraduate career. They were quick to undermine my knowledge or simply say, "No, you're not going to be able to do that," and turn me away. At this university, where anything is possible, there did not seem to be room for someone interested in farm worker justice. I would not be here were it not for the humble, underappreciated department run by lecturers that, instead of treating the passion of a 19-year-old kid as a liability to critical research and a threat to a conventional education, saw it as an asset with the potential to bring a new perspective to a severely under-investigated topic. From the first day I walked into Dr. Hsu's office, she has validated what I bring to UC Berkeley and challenged me to find ways to use my education to address the problems I had witnessed. And over the past 5 years, Dr. Hsu and the ISF department have supported and provided me the freedom to advocate for every opportunity this university claims to offer and create new ones in order to have a holistic and meaningful education. Now I realize that my story takes interdisciplinarity to the extreme, but every student graduating here today can relate to it, because every student graduating here has had a pebble in their shoe, a puzzle piece that doesn't quite fit, and an aspect of their experience that they can't let go. These students, rather than take the tried and trusted paths that this university is renowned for, have instead chosen to courageously dedicate their undergraduate careers to addressing the questions that no one else cares about. They have put in the extra effort, they have advocated, and they have taken it upon themselves to change this university through their work, bringing light to their passions, and in many cases, conducting their own research. To the families, friends, and communities that have supported me and my fellow graduates, I would like to speak only to you for a moment. I must express my sincerest gratitude for all that you have done for us, because I know the joy you felt when your student was accepted to UC Berkeley. I know the concern you had as they struggled to find their place here. And I know the confusion you expressed when your business, data science, or pre-med student ended up finding that place in interdisciplinary studies. After all, what really is an interdisciplinary studies major? What can you do with this degree? And can you even get a job after graduation? These are the questions I am sure many of you have had, and even I, the daughter of an interdisciplinary studies major, have often had to face them. But I want to share with you that over the years, I have had the privilege of studying alongside these trailblazers and witnessing their ideas and values come to life through their work. I have been enlightened by their passion for deep-sea cables in the Arctic, maternal regret, preschool handwriting, South Korean American identity, digital cookie banners, ADHD medication shortages, the culture of K-pop fandom, digital entrepreneurship, gender inequality in small business, social media impacts on just about everything you can think of, and so much more. And despite the diversity of our interests, I have found solidarity in their efforts, because it is us, interdisciplinary studies students, that do the hard work of holding UC Berkeley accountable to its mission by exposing gaps in academic opportunities, building bridges between disciplines that did not previously exist, challenging the status quo, and uplifting communities and experiences that are undervalued on this campus. And so, while you likely still have concerns about the question of interdisciplinary studies, I do hope with all my heart that you are immensely proud of what your students have accomplished. Before I end, I would like to address my fellow graduates directly. Every generation faces challenges, but the ones that we face are truly unprecedented in their severity. From the climate crisis, growing inequality, the rolling back of basic rights, to the threat of artificial intelligence, global health crises, extreme violence, and the genocide of Palestinians in Gaza being live-streamed around the world. I have been told more times than I can count that it is our generation that is going to save the world. I'll be honest, I don't know if we are going to be able to fix this. I look to the future, and I feel as though I am hurtling backwards. And so while today is a day of joyous celebration, I also share in the exhaustion of having arrived at this point, the uncertainty of what will come next, and the loneliness of not knowing if our efforts will pay off. But I cannot give up hope, because I, like everyone in this room, have known people who, in the face of overwhelming hardship, disappointment, and injustice, have continued to dedicate their lives to bringing about a millimeter of change. I believe the world needs people like us who are critical and creative, who build bridges and pathways where none have existed before, and who are willing to acknowledge and advocate for the pebble in their shoe. Now, just as you have faced during your time at UC Berkeley, you will find yourself undervalued, voted against, dismissed, and you will have obstacles put in your way by those who do not want to understand you. But I want you to know, as someone who has been inspired by who you are and what you have brought to this university, that your perspective is needed, your contributions are valued, and the ideas and communities you represent matter. And I sincerely hope that as you embark on the next chapter of your life, that you will continue to fight for your millimeter of change. Graduating class of 2024, for the achievements of today, I extend my heartiest congratulations to you and all those who have helped you along your journey. And for the endeavors of tomorrow, I offer my most fervent pride, my most genuine hope, and my wholehearted solidarity to you all. Always remember, in the words of the farm worker justice movement that has inspired my path at UC Berkeley and whose flag I proudly wear on my stole, sí se puede. Thank you.
Thank you, Alina. There is another special group of people that I know the students would want us to acknowledge. These are the major program advisors who have helped you through every stage from declaring your major to fulfilling your requirements. At this point, where are you? There you are. Good. Okay, there they are. I would like to thank our student advisors, Laura Demir, Michelle Herrera, Chelsea Prieto, and Laura Spots. We are so enormously grateful for the generosity that you have shown our students. Now, in a moment, we will begin the awarding of diplomas. First, I need to share some logistical information. If you didn't listen before, please turn off your cell phone now. Please remember that the fire marshal requires us to keep the aisles clear. There is a professional photographer who will take photos of each student when they receive their diploma. Students, the photographers will tape your name cards and send you proofs of your photos unless you have opted out. Families and friends, if you wish to take your own personal photographs of your graduates receiving their diplomas, you are welcome to. There is a designated photo area up to my right. Where are they supposed to stand? They are supposed to, okay, right over here. Great, okay. Please do not approach this photo area until your graduate is close to receiving their diploma, and then return to your seat quickly to make room for others. I will announce each major program in turn to give you time to get up. I'm now going to invite all the students who are graduating with honors to please stand and be recognized. All the names of the honor students are noted in the program. Now for the departmental citations, also noted in the program. The departmental citations are given in recognition of distinguished work by undergraduates, one in each major. The citation recognizes excellence in the major field, primarily, but not exclusively, for academic excellence. The citation winner for each program will be recognized as they receive their diploma today. Now we begin. Students, please wait for me to call your major and for the staff in the aisles to call your row to stand. We will begin with American Studies. I now ask Dr. Sarah Golden McBride, Dr. Alexandra Craighead, and Dr. Michael Mark Cohen from American Studies to come forward. They will read the names for the graduates, give out the diplomas, and announce the department citation winner.
That's it. All right. Welcome, everybody. On behalf of the faculty of the program in American Studies, it is my honor and privilege to award this year's departmental citation to Cassandra Branch. We love you.
Hello. It is my pleasure to announce the graduates in American Studies. Emma Marie Ryder. Joshua Keller. Ryder S. Jackson. Nicole Lily Choder. Junyoung Kim. Diana Handel Choi. Val Machado. Lauren Batza. Roman Kissel O'Neill. Scott Underwood. Alex Clark. Ethan Saunders. Jacob Muller. Wesley Brown. Ricardo Enrique Correa. Xavier Carlton. James William Kiefer. George Leon Avakian. Ryan J. Seck. Sierra Claire Coffo. Mia H. Schur. Adrian J. Davis. Alexis Rihanna Bishop. Maricela E. Tenori. Forrest W. Frazier. William Q. Pelton. Robert Etienne Garcia. Congratulations to the graduates in American Studies.
We will now move to interdisciplinary studies. I invite Dr. Rakesh Bandari, Dr. Shrikesh Kalnar, Dr. Feng Shu, and Dr. Quadrujaman to read the names of the graduates, give out the diplomas, and announce the departmental citation winner.
David, you're first, right? So, yeah. Oh, sorry.
He's going to go first.
David is going to go first. So you're in ISF, right? Yeah. So you have to go first. Do you want to give me your name? I mean, I know your name, but congratulations.
Congratulations, David.
So we're going to start with the ISF department. On behalf of all the faculty in ISF, I'm very proud to say that our citation winner is David Gonzalez. Congratulations, David. Marissa Almor Sabaron. Josephine Nicasio. Michaela Farouzan. Hey. Zara Bakshi. Jazleen Sanchez. Saman Ali. Anushri Banerjee, Maya Skornik Meiser, Claire Sawyer, Leah Amira Raha, Vicente Gonzalez, Mackenzie Rodriguez, Nolan Iksan Kim, yeah, congratulations. Jairo Luis Schwartz, Artemio Reyes Orta, Molly Samantha Avina, Celeste Jude, Maureen Siniad Hill, Samuel Kefilianos, Hirohiko Shimazaki, Cameron Britt, Lillian Shea, Savannah Klein, Abiel Hapte, Leo T. Borg, Samantha Ricky Sang, Drew Baker McGill, Sydney Gabriela Barker Granados, Thea Berman, Nanama Avotwe Arkoful, Kalani Michelle Dunn, Anne Duke Lay, Kevin Wong, Mikiko Michelle Bell, Cloris Guo, Emma Mitterreger, Marin Elise Dempsey, Reagan Elizabeth Whitney, Devin Askew, Mika Jin, I know your name. Vishwa Sofat, Aarti Muthukumar, Ekansh Agarwal, Caden Jacob Moskowitz, Jade Lee Nasser, Melissa Jane Richardson. Dominic Gray. Genevieve Bamford. Jolene Chalk. Junki Lin. Alina Leticia Zarate. Sanai Graydon. That's it. Congratulations to all the ISF majors. Please give them a big hand.
Now for media studies. Dr. Josh Jackson, Matthew Barry, Ian Davis, Dr. Emma Fraser, and Dr. Daniel Fisher will read the names of the graduates, give out the diplomas, and announce the departmental citation winner.
All right. Are we ready? All right. I'm happy to announce Citation Award winner, Jolene Yap. Judy Sefi. Nizma Ismail. Razkia Darna. Naibras Suleiman. Ashley Kua. Grace Paulson. Eric Andre Harapetian. Rachel Mata. Grace Cho. Angelica Lisel Moscada. Shijie Zhang. Darlene Ann Gunabi. Chloe Trinidad. Sabrina Dargai. Bianca Maccabee. Joseph Jeremy Fong. Kayong Lee. Janet Yang. Noah Zimmerman. Jericho Mark Sanchez. Sabby Sherdil. Emily Yang. Kiara Bragshaw and August. Tallene Nora Kevranyan. Whatever you like. Becky Huang.
Shreya Singh Narong. Tessa Medeiros. Linnea Butler. Sijin Guo. Ingrid De Souza Soares. Daniel Lee. Georgina Fakukaki. Alexandra Velasco. Martina Luparia. Garrick Lorenzo Coloma. Jessica Aracela Lupian. Clarissa Elise Camacho. Muna Shami. Jack Thomas Bell. Emma Taylor. Jaden Malia de Leon Cantrell. Hallie Francis. Daphne Mullen. Gabriela Ortega. Alejandra Cervantes. Paige Barella. Derek Lai. Vivian Lin.
Kyla Hua. Bella Lopez. Daniela Lake. Lily Grace Andrews. Molly Irene Cha. Emily Chun. Genevieve Bimford. Julie Ann Kufel. Kenya Oasis Terasaki. Bungie Lee. Angela Garcia. Kayla Park. Suhui Liu. Xinying Meng. Xingyao Chiu. Shuilin Luo. Wen Yu. Brandy Nicole Lopez. Tanin Carrillo. Magdalena Avila. I'm proud. Natalie Zamora. Sophie Jade Ward. Helen Pei Fun.
Zoe Herrera. John De Gennaro. Peter Joseph Niblin. Pamela Darling. Emily Elizabeth Medema. Nicholas Bede. Lila Jane Klein. Carmen Inga Trigvadar. Sydney Foon. Madeline Cooper. Jonathan Din. Tessa Ann Flynn. Dashel Dunn. Celine Pham. Amber Abruzzo. Duo Shu. Yan Pu. Xiao Yu Chu. Madison Creekbaum. Tyler Lee. Veronica Roseborough. Maya Michelle Buñuelos. Celeste Abigail Cepeda Chavez. Kylan Sony. Sean Saint Rai. Matthew Ekadal. Lorena Perez Salazar. Allison Than.
Michaela Trin. Rochelle Longa. Ashley Fu. Yawen Lin. Alejandro Raziel Canas Rangel. Natasha Eliana Aranda K. John Dugan. Braxton Aiden Young. Joyce Yareem Kim. Phoenix Gauthier. Maya Cooper. Caitlin Guntel. Zoe Bella Marin Swintek. Kayla Rose O'Neill. Brazil Asha Richards. Sheris Faith Clark. Sharif Sivad. Mia Isabella Mastrov. Sophia Marina Mordidelli. Ruby Bameo Eman. Reina Ujimoto. Suzu Imamoto. Cheun Kim. Isaiah Alexander Velasco. Tessa Keane. Paul E. Ikeda. Elena Medina. Reagan Taylor Phillips. Gabrielle Soren Vigeland. Emma Marie McMasters. Logan Sarah Reeves. Therese Sahota.
Tess Feldman. Cooper Endicott. Michelle Pacheco. Noel Solis. Esther Huang. Min Tu Da. Tianjiao Zhang. Ruhao Irene Pang. Juyi Nanji. Weiran Gai. Ho Dum Huang. Stella Lena Kotik. Jalen November Grace Rena Calejas. James Nguyen. Jonathan Delmendo. Oscar Lochabal. Jesse Wu. Oge Okpala. Maya Lucia Gessner. Brooke Buckner. Lily Eileen Wayland. Angelo Javier. Ashley Joy Arpieda Santos. Cindy Martinez. Aubrey Gail Quinto. Megan Louis. Shuo Zhang. Castagnet. Christine Wu. Tatiana Steiner. Jenna Rizzi. Michelle Lee. Kelly Ann Suth. Christian Carlo Zaragoza. Looking good.
Albert Gallardo. Tia Lam. Sana Alec. Cosette Carranza. Blake Gozasti. Elise Leolani Biyun. Mara Laughlin. Mallory Rose Reynosa. Kennedy Zion Goss. Hong Ying Lee. Sarah Zhang. Emily Chu. Julia Maoji. Alexandra Subin O. Eliana Minsa Kim. Lulu Cardoza. Gianna Marie Giacomelli.
Jasleen Bonilla Alfaro.
Kira Kutcher. Karen Ha. Lucas Gilmore. Jennifer DeLugo. Nerissa Chong. Fiona Colentes. Kelsey Cho. Emily Chong Mi Beck. Alexandra Denise Dizon Cruz. Cindy Harris. Christopher Scales. Jaime Mendoza Ramos. Kelly Sophie Tai. Cindy Wu. Tara Tillemon. Kimberly Barros. Grace Garcia. Naya Marquez. Congratulations, Media Studies.
Congratulations, graduates of 2024. Graduates, would you please stand? Now, by the virtue of the authority delegated to me by the Regents of the University of California, I hereby confer upon you the degree of Bachelor of Arts and all the rights and privileges pertaining to that degree. And we have one more rite of passage. Back in the days when we got to walk around like this, when tasseled caps were standard academic apparel, undergraduates wore the tassels on the right and graduates wore them on the left. Graduating seniors, please make sure your caps have their tassels on the right. Now, please turn around and face your family and friends. In just a, shh. Okay. All at once, in a moment here, you're going to move your tassel from the right to the left. Do that now. Now, if you'd be seated for just one more minute, please. Families and friends, thank you so much for all you have done for our students and for all you have done for the University of California. Dear graduates, as you go out in the world, please stay curious, stay courageous, act with integrity, read books by people you disagree with, and do what you can to make the world a little better than you found it. We are so proud of you and so curious to see all the good that you will do. Fiat Lux.